To understand why the war happening in Iran is so dangerous, first we must understand this map now. Just look at this map on the screen. You may see the countries around Iran. So, most of the Gulf countries surrounding Iran has the American military bases like the army base forces or the naval forces or the air forces. In short, we can say that the most of the countries surrounding Iran, the United States has established its strong military forces, and in this video we are going to look at the history behind this serious war. Welcome to Youturn, and this is Nandini Madheshwaran. So today when we say Middle East, most of the world associates with those countries is its oil wealth, and the top 5 countries which supplies most of the oil, and the first is Venezuela, the second is Saudi Arabia, and the third is Iran, where the war is now taking place, and the fourth is Canada, and the fifth is Iraq. So among the world's top 5 countries which supplies most of the oil, 3 of the countries are in Gulf region, that is Saudi Arabia, Iran and Iraq. So in the other 2 Gulf countries, that is Iraq and Saudi Arabia, there are already US military forces, and one country doesn't allow the US military forces is Iran, and that is the main reason for the current war. After Saddam Hussein was killed in Iraq, the United States took strong dominance in Iraq. And after that, Syria was also destabilized. But even after all these events, Iran continued to show its strong resistance to the United States. And this is not something new. In 1951, Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh came into power, and he announced that all the Iran's oil would be nationalized. But from 1909 onwards, most of the British companies were been extracting and benefiting from the Iranian oil. But when Mossadegh, who came to power with the strong public support, announced the nationalization, it created severe tension between the United States and the United Kingdom. The UK, which had suffered economically after the World War II, had to heavily depend on the Iranian cheap oil for its recovery. So this move was a huge blow. And as a result, the CIA and the British intelligence, they both planned to overthrow the Mossadegh's government. So under the name Operation Ajax, they executed a coup in 1953 to overthrow the Mossadegh's government. But at the same time, Iran's then foreign minister Hossein Fatemi strongly supported the nationalization, but he was ultimately arrested, tortured and even executed. But before his execution, many of the Western media portrayed him as a dangerous communist, which is one of the propaganda campaign. So the coup was carried out under the retired Army General Fazilova Zahedi. And after that, the United States shifted its attention to the Iran's oil reserves. And under that, an agreement was signed in which 50% of the oil profits would go to Iranian government and the remaining 40% would go to American companies. On one side, the oil reserves were extremely important for the US, and on the other side, Iran was strategically important to counter the Soviet Union and Russia of West Asia. So the US calculated that Iran would stay as a pillar of its Middle East foreign policy. Ironically, the US itself initiated Iran's nuclear program in 1953 under the Atoms for Peace initiative. Even the research center was established in Tehran, and the first nuclear reactor was built under American assistance. And America even supplied openly uranium to Iran. But over time, as US influence grew over Iran's policies, Iran began to take independent steps. And one of the most crucial steps was shaking hands with Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Venezuela in forming OPEC, that is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which was created mainly to resist the Western influence or dominance in oil pricing. So gradually US influence began to decline inside Iran, and Iran's oil policy began to serve its own national interests. In 1976, in an attempt to pressure back Iran to the US alignment, the US along with Saudi Arabia helped to push back the oil prices down. And this severely leads to Iran's revenue and led to severe crisis. But then in 1979, a massive revolution erupted, which is known as Islamic Revolution or the Iranian Revolution. The Shah dynasty was overthrown and the anti-American government was formed under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. From that point onwards, Iran became openly anti-American, and since 1979, the US had attempted many times to overthrow the Iranian government. For example, in Venezuela, the president Nicolas Maduro had been reportedly detained and he had been taken to the US, and America began to speak about the oil access. Similarly, the US President Donald Trump has been talking about annexing the Greenland. In the same way, the US has attempted several ways to control Iran also. And during the Iran and Iraq war, the US supported Iraq. Later, when Iraq also opposed US, Saddam Hussein was killed and overthrown. Only because Iran refused to submit in 1995, the US government announced the total embargo. That is, the American companies were banned to do any business with Iran. Then came the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, in which the act says that when other countries economically had connections with Iran, it would be punishable. From 2003 onwards, the Iran had filed many complaints to the United Nations accusing US of violating the international laws through drone incursions and covert operations. And several Iranian leaders and nuclear scientists were assassinated over the years. And recently, after Israel began its war in Gaza, many of the global analysts started arguing that the destruction of Gaza was not only about Gaza. It was the strategy to target Iran and the Middle East. But now the conflict has been escalated. So the important leader of Iran, Khomeini, had been assaulted, and more than 500 people in Iran had been dead. Several civilians and even school children have been killed. And because of this war, most of the flights to the Gulf countries had been cancelled and nearly 3 lakh people are stranded. So most of the people, especially most of the Indians, are living in UAE and Qatar. In countries like UAE and Qatar, most of the Indians work there, and most of the people who went on temporary visits are unable to return to the country. Iran has also begun attacking the US bases in the countries like UAE, Qatar and Kuwait. Most important thing is that there is the Strait of Hormuz, and nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow 33-kilometer waterway. Oil from Iraq, Saudi Arabia and other countries must pass through this route only. And Iran has announced it closes the Strait of Hormuz, and most of the countries which depend the oil route on this way faces severe oil crisis. And for India, this strait is a lifeline because 50% of the oil imports comes through this route, and more than 80 to 85% of the LPG also travel via this route. And if the war continues for months, India could face severe oil shortages, and the crude oil's rate also rises sharply across the world. On one side, the US says it will not stop the war until the Iran is dismantled or brought under control. And on the other side, Iran also says that it will not give up and it will avenge for the people and its leader. And Russia and China have also condemned attacks, but they have not directly entered into the war. But when their position changes, the consequences could be massive. So now the war is becoming a battle, that is, who is going to control the entire Middle East. The future of Asia, maybe the world, be dependent on this war. Above all, the safety of Indians living in the Gulf countries is the most important thing. Innocent civilians are becoming the victims for the geopolitical power struggles. So, India must ensure their protection and work diplomatically to stop the war. However, unlike its neutral stance in the Russia-Ukraine war or Gaza war, India has now signaled a support to Israel during this conflict of the war. Prime Minister Narendra Modi condemned Iran's action, but he did not condemn to the killing of Iran's leader. Instead, he spoke with Israel's president. So this suggests a direct shift in India's foreign policy towards the Israel and the United States. India was once a leader for the non-aligned movement after independence, but now its foreign policy appears to be shifting. So more than anyone else in the world, India has the high responsibility to stop the war because millions of Indians are living in the Gulf countries. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.